We'd like to thank the following sponsors for helping provide this video.
So, without further ado, I'd like to present Sean Barrett from Vistaprint, who is going to give us an awesome workshop.
Thank you very much for coming tonight. This is the Quantifying Cost of Delay session. There will be a little bit of math, so if you weren't told, you've now been warned. First off, I'd like to give credit where credit is due. This workshop was originally designed by Joshua Arnold and Oslo Muse, both the founders of BlackSwanFarming.com. They were our teachers from Emergent as we were learning our Agile transformation at Vistaprint, and they very generously offered to share this material with us for the benefit of you guys. They've delivered it at many international Agile conferences. I was fortunate enough to join us recently at Agile 2015, delivering this workshop. Tonight, I'm actually joined by all of the members of our Vistaprint Agile Transformation team. You might have noticed our fancy uniforms. So they'll be moving around, helping us throughout the workshop as we are going through the exercises. There's often a lot of questions, so we'll introduce them in a little bit, one by one, and they'll be helping us out. So thank you to them. So, quantifying cost of delay. We're going to try to cover and help you understand why, as Don Reinertsen said, this is the one thing that you want to be putting a number on if you're going to quantify anything in your business. It's very important. It's right at the core of the notion of prioritization and producing value for your customers. We also want to help you get started with this concept. It's really not that difficult. The math itself is actually very simple in almost all cases, and so this is really just to get you familiar with it. So how many people here have ever experienced, say, some difficulty in getting clearly prioritized epics into their backlogs? Anybody? Yeah, this is a pretty common issue, right? Prioritization can be difficult because we often lean our gut feel rather than data itself. And when we turn to cost of delay, it gives us an opportunity to take a look at the value of our options. And when we understand those better, our ability to set aside the work that we shouldn't be doing becomes really clear. Once you understand the value in an objective way rather than just gut feel. Gut feel tends to lead to a lot of arguments about my opinion, your opinion. Data helps us resolve those more easily. So let's start with a little thought experiment to get us started. So you are going to be stuck for the next 2 years on a deserted island. If you knew this in advance and you had an opportunity to take one thing with you to have on that island, what do you think it would be? So take a moment, think to yourself, get a thought, and then share that with your neighbors. Would anyone like to share what they had as an idea?
Yeah. I know this is cheating, but satellite phone.
Anybody else?
Yeah, so he said about, I voted that was cheating because the requirements say if you have for 2 years. He voted for water filtration, and I voted for a multi-tool, a Leatherman. So that you can build a bunch of stuff.
Nice. Okay. So hopefully you all picked something for yourselves. So you were on a small plane, and you had packed this thing dutifully in your luggage, and only to find that your airline has lost your luggage. So now that you're there, stuck on the island, you have high hopes of having this wonderful multi-tool with you, how much would you be willing to pay to get that back, now that you really need it? So take a moment, talk to your partners, see if you can put a number on what that's worth to you if you're going to be there for the next 2 years. Anybody willing to share did anybody come to a number that they'd be willing to share? Back?
Whatever it took. I can't use money for the next 2 years.
Okay. Did anybody actually come to a number? Anyone? No? No guesses?
15 bamboo rods.
There's no wrong answers.
The number I came up with is 50,000.
Okay.
It seemed like, I'm not going to spend
part with pretty happily with that? Okay. What was your item that you wanted to take with you?
Oh, mine was a simple knife. I didn't even think of the Leatherman, but the Leatherman would have been great.
Simple knife, good for coconuts. All right. Anybody else? Got a number? It's 50,000 low. High. Priceless. We hear that a lot. I would give anything I had to have that thing that I really needed, saying that a satellite phone. Okay? So, thinking about how much we would pay for something, a willingness to pay, is one technique we can use to put an actual dollar value on something that might otherwise feel pretty intangible. So, estimating value by willingness to pay, just one tool in that set. Many people think that the study of economics is about money. In fact, it's really more about the study of scarce resources, choices that people make in regard to those scarce resources, and how those choices define the value of those scarce resources. Now, in software development, a lot of people think that the capacity to develop is in fact the scarce resource. And so we need to be cautious with it and make sure we're applying it in the best places for the most valuable work. So, as promised, this is our team from Vistaprint. We all work towards the Agile transformation that's been going on for about 2 years there. If you guys would stand up, we've got JP moving around, there he is. He's going to be joining us he's got a little thing to contribute later on. We've got David, which I'm sure many of you know. Julie, unfortunately, is out sick tonight. We also have Daryl, Stacy. Oh, there we are. And Chris, and I'm Sean. So they'll be coming around during the exercises to help answer any questions. All right, so our workshop tonight is divided into 2 sections. The first is the building block section, where we're going to kind of go through some of the theory, do some exercises, give you a chance to reflect, and then we'll actually begin to tackle what's a real-world idea, something that could be implemented. We've run this with quite a few people, so we have some experience on where people land on estimating the value of this. I think that'll be interesting to share, and we'll go through that in the second half. So, to start, we've covered our intro. Next up is some theory. Following that, we're going to cover one exercise where I'll lead you through it. We'll pass out a page for that where you guys can kind of walk through it with me. And then the second exercise we'll ask you to do on your own. So there's a whole kind of a description there and questions to answer. That's when you want to reach out to the coaches or ask your neighbors if you have questions. I'll be moving around too. And finally, we'll have a chance to reflect using a graphical organizer tool, which has been on the tables. You can see it in the last panel there. This is something that JP recently had experience using with another group, and so we're borrowing it. And I'd just like him to kind of help describe it for you guys.
Thank you, Sean. This piece of paper you should find in a packet on your table, maybe on your crib sheet. This is no ordinary piece of paper, dear friends. Those of you who attended Cornell University may be familiar with the concept of a graphic organizer. This is something you might want to use to learn, to better internalize the concepts that we're going to cover tonight. The reason for this is that it's pretty well understood that as humans, we remember what we write down more than we remember what we hear. Also, the human brain remembers not just the concepts, but also the spatial location of where we put information down. So how would you use this? For example, in a few minutes, we're going to watch a short video that may introduce some new vocabulary and concepts to you. You may want to put some of the main points of the video on the left-hand side column, and some of the topics, the words, the evidence, or even your questions and puzzlements on the right-hand side. And throughout the remainder of the presentation tonight, literally draw some lines and some connections between the concepts. This will help you remember and internalize what possibility is and why you might want to use it. Sean, back to you.
Let's get started with the theory. This video here kind of sets the context for why we're interested in cost of delay. It's done by Joshua Arnold, one of the original designers of the workshop.
In most organizations, it seems to take a long time to get things done. Part of the reason for this is not that each of the actions required takes a long time, it's that things actually spend most of the time in various queues waiting to be worked on. Here's a fairly typical example. It's a feature that took a total of 46 weeks to deliver from when it was first captured. Of that time, it actually spent 38 weeks waiting in various backlogs and queues. You may not believe it, but if you do the same thing in your organization, you'll probably find something similar. It is not unusual for the amount of waiting time to be in excess of 80% of the total time taken. Seems crazy, doesn't it? The thing is, most organizations are blind to queues. We tend to focus more on the efficiency of the parts of the process, not the whole system that is required to deliver value. This hides how long it takes to deliver value end to end. Part of what drives this blindness is that we have a really poor understanding of how much the delay is costing us. Our gut feel about the urgency and value of things is often quite wrong. For instance, when we worked out the cost of delay for this feature, we discovered that it was actually worth over $200,000 per week. So, the 38 weeks that this opportunity spent waiting in various queues actually cost the organization almost $8 million in revenue. If they had known the cost of delay earlier, they would have done a number of things differently. If we are to make better decisions, we need to understand how the value of the things we are working on is leaking away over time. Knowing the cost of delay means we can put a price tag on all these queues and waiting. So, understanding the cost of delay helps us in three ways. Firstly, it helps us make better decisions by making the economic trade-offs visible. The value of speed over efficiency is easy to understand. Secondly, it helps us with prioritization. By using CD3, cost of delay divided by duration, we actually deliver more total value for a given capacity. And lastly, cost of delay helps us to change the focus from dates and cost estimates, which can encourage the wrong behavior, to speed and value. Put simply, cost of delay is a way of communicating value and urgency. Without information about the cost of delay, the system will optimize for other things.
So thanks again to Joshua. He was a great teacher for us, and I really appreciate the RSA style stuff. I love those. So the theory, put pretty simply, this is about putting a price tag on time. So we're going to investigate sort of the value side as well as the urgency aspect of our ideas and how they compare to one another. We're going to talk a little bit about business value of features as well as information value. Often we think only about the money, and there's great value sometimes in lowering our uncertainty by gathering the right information at the right time. And then finally, we'll take a look specifically at how that value might decay over time or behave over time. So first up, a framework for thinking about value. So very simple, but we don't always articulate these thoughts behind how we think about value. So we've got four buckets here: increasing revenue, protecting revenue, reducing costs, and avoiding costs. They're fairly simple. They're on your handouts there if you want to take a closer look at them. Increasing revenue is really the standard kind of thing that we think about. A new product introduction, a new service, something that's going to have a set of value over time. That's a standard increased revenue idea. Protecting revenue, maybe a little bit different. Some folks might be familiar with it. If you're worried about a competitor taking some of your market share, then an idea to protect against that could be an idea that fits in this bucket. Reducing costs, automation to handle something that humans do today to make it faster, more reliable, take less labor. Those are ways to reduce costs. And avoiding costs is a bucket that's all about avoiding a penalty. Any of you who work with credit cards in your business know that PCI compliance is a mandatory thing. If you don't comply, they can fine you on a monthly basis if you don't meet. That's what kind of falls in the avoiding costs bucket. The reason we're interested in these is if we can articulate where our idea is coming from, where we think the value is, that enables us to have better discussions with our peers when we're trading off which ideas we want to invest in. So, part of the reason why is that we want to drag out the assumptions that are locked inside of us, make those assumptions visible so we can debate them. A couple of tactics for getting to that value. One, automating a process we could think of by making the cost making the estimate of the value equal to the cost of the alternative. So in the terms of automating a process, if we were to pay someone money to do a job every day, and the alternative was to create an automated system that would do that job, we think Second idea, estimating the value of the effects of the change. So this is more like an increased revenue type thing or protect revenue. Once you've done it, whatever the impact is, whatever value that would create, this is a way that you can begin to put a number to these things. We'll go through this in more depth in the exercises themselves. So these urgency profiles cover what is the characteristic of value over time. This first one here is the most common. It's called the long unaffected, which means a long time horizon on the value of the idea, and it's unaffected by the delay. So over whether you wait 6 months or 6 years, the value is still there and it still projects out into the future if you were to pursue it. So that's this type of profile. A classic example would be a new product introduction. So some product that isn't available in the world today, you believe there's demand for it. If you create it, that value will begin to come into your company, and that will then have a long trajectory in the future. And that's represented by that kind of long, flat line of value delivery in the future. Second profile is for limited time duration ideas. And this one is short time duration, where the peak may be affected by delay. Now, in Vistaprint's business, we have a very steady business throughout the year, but in the holiday season, we actually have quite a lot more business for folks who are ordering things for the holidays, calendars, Christmas cards, that sort of thing. It's very seasonal. And so if we miss the opening of the season, either in preparation of our products or in preparation of our marketing, we can actually miss out on a lot of the value that's in that very short window. And because people have a time limit for themselves, they may go to a competitor, and then that creates the reduction in the peak. It's not like if we wait and we get it all in the last 2 weeks, all those customers are still going to be available. The third one looks a lot like the first in that there's a long tail of the value, but in this case we want to recognize that the peak value that you might have in this idea could be affected by waiting. So a case like here might be a social networking business. So if you are in a race with somebody else to gather users and you're in the market 6 months after your competitor, once those users kind of associate themselves with a platform, they may be very unwilling to switch. We've seen this in many different types of businesses, and that's the type that would be appropriate for profile number 3. And the fourth one here, the interesting point isn't actually the shape of the curve or where it sits, it's that red line in the bottom, which we call the last responsible moment. So the idea here is that some things, some of our ideas, may not have any more value at all if we were to deliver them today than if we did in 3 months. If there's no cost of waiting. So, for example, if we had a new product that we would only sell during holiday, and we were getting it ready in March and April for the Christmas season, if we deliver that in May, that doesn't really benefit us. We've got many months of that sitting on the shelf. And so, really, with a 2-month lead time, our last responsible moment to begin on it is more like June 1st or July 1st. Fair enough? Okay, great. That's the theory. All right, so first exercise you'll find in your packets, L'Oreal, and we'll walk through it here. So imagine that you work for L'Oreal, manufacturer of professional hair care products, and they have an inventory management process where they take weekly stock of all their inventory. It takes a team of 12 people, 5 hours every week to do this, and they pay the warehouse folks about $20 an hour. We have a new guy on the team, Mark. He's got a bright idea, and he thinks that he wants to introduce an automated system to scan items as they come into the warehouse, scan them as they're sent out for deliveries, and then to get this implemented, he wants to create a sense of urgency by helping those people around him understand what it costs to not do this, what it costs to wait to implement an automation system like this. So our first question is pretty straightforward. It's right off the crib sheet there. Which of the 4 benefit types does this idea contribute to? So of those 4 buckets, increase revenue, protect revenue, avoid costs, and reduce costs. Reduce costs, yes, that's exactly what it is. Very good. So, question 2. It's estimated it will take 4 weeks to get this system up and running. As it does, the people will kind of peel off gradually from doing the stock taking into into other valuable work. So they're going to move on to other things in the warehouse. Now, assuming that that work starts today, can we draw what we think the ramp up of benefits looks like? And I'm going to show you a spot here. So if this is 4 weeks on the timeline, this is what we would draw, profile number 1. It's going to ramp up over time. So without any further information, we just said this is linear, ramping up. And that flat line at the top, that's going to represent whatever the value of this idea is in the long run. So we've been spending people's money, people's time, which costs us salary money on this. And that's represented by that flat line in terms of dollars per week that we were spending. Now, we have a senior executive who needs to make a decision about whether to go ahead and pursue this automation. And he's away on vacation. He's going to be gone for a couple of weeks. So we'd like to draw the impact of him being away. What's that going to look like? So this is going to start to look a little bit like the profiles that you've got at the bottom. So what we have here is a 2-week delay, and all it does is it takes that ramp and it says, hey, that's going to start further out in time. And then when we shade the area in between, that's going to represent the total money lost by having waited. And you remember your geometry. Parallelograms are kind of like rectangles. The area there is just width times height. So what's really interesting here is how long you wait and where that top flat line is once your idea has come fully into the regular benefits that it provides. So pretty straightforward math. So which of the 4 urgency profiles does this most closely resemble? Either the first or the last? Okay. So what's the difference between the first and the last? It's that last responsible moment, right?
There's no last.
There's no last responsible moment. We could start saving on this today if we began working on it.
Well, there is some sense. You have much more business, a lot more activity in the warehouse, usually in November and December, October, seasonal. So therefore, you could probably want to place by October 1st.
So it's actually, you want to think about it as if we could start on it today, will we begin accruing value if we were able to deliver the capability right at this moment? And since you're spending the money every day, you could start saving today. So it's a long life, unaffected peak, the first profile there. So now we get to the interesting part. What's the actual cost of delay? Here's where the numbers come in. Anybody willing to take a fast stab at what they think is involved? Would you need to come up with that number? In dollars per week?
You would have to know what the weekly saving is, because even though I wrote.
Yeah, so all this data was in the top paragraph there.
Yeah, 60 hours, $20 per hour.
60 hours, $20 per hour. Yeah.
What's the plan of cost?
More than 2,400.
More than 2,400. Okay. So I heard the hourly rate. I heard the 5 hours a week, the 12 people, so that's 60 hours. The hourly rate, and then that comes out to $1,200 per week. Now, I want you to note that this is a per week. So this is a ratio of how much would you lose every week that you go. And the reason for this is when you use this tool to have conversations with your peers, you can have a conversation like, hey, the cost of delay on this is $20,000 a week. This is a really valuable idea. Do you really want to put me off for a week before I can talk to you to get a decision from you, Mr. Executive, about whether we should go path A or path B? Because that's actually going to cost us $20,000. It really changes the tone of the conversation when you're able to start talking numbers and put something on a time frame that means something to people. If you start talking about a year long out, it's just a little too easy to ignore it. You talk about this week and how we can change something, that grabs people's attention in a hurry. All right, number 6. What is the total delay cost incurred if this is delayed by 2 weeks? So our run rate is $1,200 a week. We wait 2 weeks. $2,400. That's right. So very simple math for the math portion of this. All right, you guys ready to try it on your own? Okay, page 2 there. It's going to have the second exercise. Go ahead and start out. We'll have about 10 minutes for this. Feel free to stick a hand up, ask a question of the coach, or ask your neighbors. necessarily a single right answer. And in fact, particularly when you're talking about these, you may have concepts that contribute to multiple.
Right, depends what your perspective is in the company you're asking from too. On the finance side, you're like,
All about this.
all this, and you're in the business side.
But I would say that if you at least focused on one of these, you'd have something to talk about.
Yes.
Drink water. Maybe a benefit of bringing in the other elements as well.
Yeah. Now, most times until you've talked about it, you'll have one person thinking the solution is all about this,
Yes, right.
and another thinking it's completely about that. You're not realizing there's actually two components that could be benefit out of it, and in fact, the cost delay is much higher than the originally thought by either one of you.
Right. In one case, you're losing revenue as well as your costs are going up.
Exactly.
So that's
You've got both happening.
both happening.
You never got to the potential lawsuit overcharging.
Yeah, there is an avoid costs in there, isn't there?
That's a good point.
Very observant.
So the less you fix it, the shorter the slide goes out.
So the cost loss, when you are losing more, the later you enter.
Once they are done, it's the same. It's constant.
Yes, once it's done. But if they did even later, the peak would be down lower. Right.
Yeah, but it will stay
So that
constant.
means that the later the estimate, no, because they're losing more and more people.
No, what I think both of you are saying different. This is what he is saying is what he's saying is that once you go here and then do it, you will lose.
Yes.
Right. That's what he's saying. There's a bunch of both of you are saying the incorrect thing.
I think we come to the same answer. Math is somewhat simplified as an example.
So, here for a moment, let's just take a minute, grab that graphical organizer that JP introduced, and reflect on kind of whatever has registered with you for recalling later, and help yourself make a connection to it. So just take a minute for that. The rest of the team is passing out our next piece, which is going to be the real-world example between Vistaprint and LinkedIn. What we have here is an idea. And we'll run through it here. You'll have a sheet in front of you here in a second. We want you guys to work in pairs, twos or threes if you have an odd number at the table, so that we can have some of that conversation flowing as we go through the problem. So imagine you work for Vistaprint, and one of your colleagues brings you a bright idea for offering business cards on LinkedIn in a Google-style ad. So using the profile data that LinkedIn customers have already entered into their profiles, it exists on LinkedIn, imagine that we could generate a pre-designed business card with all of your information on it, and then render that in an ad right beside your own profile or whatever you're looking at on LinkedIn. That way users would be able to recognize that it's their information, their business genre, and they'd be able to click on it and very quickly place an order for something that's very available, very cheap. So this is kind of a mock-up of the concept. You can see the ad over here on the right side. If you look at it closely in your sheets that you have available, it's on the back side. You can see that the information there is pulled directly from the user's profile from Muslim. Okay? So this is the concept. Now, you also have in front of you what we call a lean canvas. And so this is it's another type of graphical organizer. And it's just a way of sort of organizing your thoughts. Now, I've grayed out a couple of spots here, but I wanted to leave you sort of the full picture of what we would use for an idea like this at Vistaprint. Now, the why and the what, those have been provided to you. So that's what's on the other sheet, the one that describes the concept and gives you an idea of the mock-up. So we can forego those pieces. The CD3 priority and the duration piece, that's kind of the next thing that comes after cost of delay. If you're interested, check out Black Swan Farming. There's some other references at the end of the material tonight. You can go dig into that one, or come out to Uno's tonight and we can talk about it. So the stuff in white, use those as kind of workspace to organize your thinking, work with your partners. What we really want you to come to is this cost of delay number, the bright green one there. That's in dollars per week. And then we're going to get everybody up and see what we came up with. Okay? So 15 minutes to do this one, and then we'll gather back together. stick a hand up if you'd like any help. Feel free to talk to your neighbors too.
So many times you go through like this, just put a date on the side, or you read an article, it's perfect, you look at it, and like one time you just give them the ads, and I don't care what the ads is, but on LinkedIn and this is we're going to provide a benefit for you. The low assumption is saying that you carry without correcting. You did it well. In other words, you took the profile and you translated the profile into something that the customer would buy. At least you give an example. Is that on there? Using profile data.
I see lots of progress being made out there. So if you've come to a number that you could write down maybe in the Sharpie in that box so we can see it from afar, just write down your number and then you can bring it up here in the corner. We're going to post them all on the wall on this side. Actually, I think we're going to do two sections because there's quite a few of us. Half of you, self-organized, come on over here. The other half, we've got a spot on the window. But try to sort your stuff with your peers, left to right, between the high and the low. Put the high estimates near the high marker and the lowest estimates near the low. So I think most of our estimates are up. So if we could have you gather around your section where you dropped off your estimate, we've got a lot up here. So if anybody left wants to bring theirs over to the window wall, go ahead and go gather around there. We'd like to actually have you standing around the space in like a semicircle. So come on up. All right, so on the first question, I like to say this
Yeah, because we're assuming everybody.
Yeah, 1% of 364 million provides $5. Yeah, $5 revenue per order of $500. We figure an average year. Some people go through business cards. 1.8 billion, 1% of 300 users spread over a year. And maybe indirect. I was interested in seeing the new contract, so we made other sanctions. We're sure how many meetings. So we figured out of that, out of the basic all the time, helping the people that are out of a job or starting a job. So we said, well, let's assume that maybe 10% of all of that. And out of that, how many of those were like this way? And then we used the 1%. And then we say that the business card's only $25.
And how many,
So then I would go back in.
did they actually,
Also,
the box that we had, and so based on the same assumptions, we did, part 50 what we did, even though we were thinking the same line. There's a range of
there's more.
I guess the higher the number, the more likely to prioritize. Yeah, that's right. Then you got to determine whether it's
Because we looked up in Google to just now, access are much lower. So we came up with 8 million.
From what we know right now, it's the same project.
I would compare it with other things your company might want to do at that time, that you also don't know about. So if you're doing this, you're not doing something else.
So comparison and historical results might be one.
Comparison to other projects that are up for consideration.
It's true, and what the price would be for delaying those.
I would say there's a real danger of analysis paralysis because, it's all about getting the fake in the numbers. You don't have a really good feel for when somebody's presenting you for all of these estimates that,
But maybe that means you shouldn't be doing the project.
you may have to hire an expert who has done this sort of thing before. So there's another cost you may have to add into the project.
To a
You
focus.
could do a lot of upfront analysis, sure. You could hire someone who's done it, or
do a very small experiment. If you do a Google ad link, AdWords, and then you do a very tiny experiment with this, and you just see what's the rate that you get for each one of them, and then the cost of the delay becomes the difference between those two. And in fact, it may not be profitable to do it at all.
interesting. So you're suggesting that one of the killer assumptions here might be the
size of what you're trying to estimate. When you're trying to estimate it at all, like upfront prediction as opposed to just empirically trying a small, inexpensive experiment and then see what you get.
a strong divergence of opinions of what a typical rate could be.
That's the variable that has the most, the item has the most variability.
So,
how about parameterizing it and get it down to one thing? You draw a graph.
So who here would execute a project for $5,000 to $6,000 a week? Who would execute and allocate the funding for $5 million? So somewhere in that range, you have a go no go in your mind, right?
Part of the question is cost to the company. How much bigger the incremental cost to make things happen? Would you need extra capacity?
Perhaps, right? Anything that we do means that there's a whole bunch of other ideas and projects that we don't do.
Does it cost to delay the rest of your work?
Ta-da! Say that again.
Does it cost to delay the rest of your current work?
Yes, there's a cost. It's the opportunity cost, right? So I think in a sense, so let's say that we all believe this is worth $5 million a week. Do we launch into a year-long project and then hope at the end that the money materializes? Or do we?
Or take the same resources and devote them to 5 other smaller projects. Feel comfortable with them and gain some measurable value.
Quantify the value of what you have, of what you think you have.
Right.
Or if we can break down the project and minimalize the project upfront to start to see the value.
As executives, how much would you be willing to pay for somebody to give you the answer, that conversion rate, so that you can determine whether this is
All right. Great discussion, great points so far that we had here in the forum. I'll just share, in this corner, our range ran from about $1,000 a week to 1.5 million. Anybody from over there?
4,000 to 5 million.
4,000 to 5 million. So very similar orders of magnitude. So that's great. So I heard a lot of these types of numbers being talked about. So addressable market, how many people are going to actually buy, how many orders per year, per user, how much profit. So these are the kind of numbers that people are using to come up with that. And yet we still come out with 3 orders of magnitude difference in opinion. That's great. So of these, which did people think was the most uncertain? Where was the biggest guess? Conversion rate. Yeah, we usually hear that. Conversion rate, we don't know yet. So what are we going to do about that? If we don't know, test. Yes, you guys are all Agilists, you know this stuff. This is great. So you want to test into it. That's exactly right. So one thing from Black Swan Farming that I think is really worth bringing up here is that this data came from Maersk Line, the shipping company. And when Özlem and Joshua worked there, they collected a bunch of data estimating the value of the features they had in their backlog. And when they plotted them out in this graph, and it's simply cost of delay on the y-axis, and then they just sort them out from highest on the left to lowest on the right. And what they found wasn't really what they expected. They thought there might be some linear distribution or some gentle curve or something, and it's a power law curve. There's a very few items that have a very high cost of delay, very high value. In the case of Vistaprint, it's business cards. For a very long time, there were 40 to 50% of our total market, even though we had hundreds of products. There are these rare black swans that are worth investing in, and if you get those right and you make the quality good, those are the things that make or break your business. Now, we actually collected all this data at Vistaprint as well. So after we learned about all this stuff, it took us about 6 months or so. We collected them up. We got everybody to estimate what they thought their ideas were worth. We plotted it out, and lo and behold, it was exactly this curve. It was identical. It's the same power law curve. There were just a few ideas that we had that we thought were huge. And we had lots and lots of them that we thought were marginal, right? Like in the tens of thousands per week sort of way. And you know where we were spending all of our time? It wasn't on the high end of that curve. Until we started to look at it, we were incentivized by whatever we were incentivized by. Your responsibility is to make sure this project gets out the door by December. Nobody even asked the question, is it worth doing? Right? Somebody had an idea, they thought it was good, gut feel, go do this. And then when we actually put a number on it, we find out we're just wasting our time. And this is why quantifying the cost of delay is the one thing that you want to actually put numbers on. All right, so wrap up. We went through some building blocks, help you understand why it's the one thing that you want to be putting some real data numbers to. Hopefully, we gave you some confidence. It's really not that hard. Go gather some data. The math is easy, and it's really going to become about the conversation. Don't worry about precision when you're doing these. You're looking for the difference in 3 orders of magnitude. Now, 1 significant digit is plenty. Round off your numbers, make the math easy for yourself. And in the end, what we're really looking for is that ability to test, and test specifically the right things. So if you can identify where your greatest uncertainty lies, invest just a little bit of time to lower that uncertainty and decide, is it on the $1,000 end or the $1 million end? And if it's up on the million, keep investing. And if it's not, dump it. Just ignore it and move on, because there's going to be a better idea out there. All right, go ahead and take a moment. You've got your graphic organizers. Grab down whatever was most relevant for you, and then we'll call it a night. I'd like to leave you with sort of one parting thought here, and that is, you might have heard Joshua say this at the end of the video. Without information about value, our systems will optimize for other things, and it will be uncontrolled, and they may not be the things that you want. All right, I'd like to thank all of our Vistaprint volunteers who came along. We'll be around to take questions, but I know we do have a time constraint. Tom, do you need to wrap up anything with feedback? Okay.
Yes, I do.
Can we take questions while you guys pass this around? All right, great. I know there are some folks who would like to ask one, so we'll open it up for this general Q&A.
So in an environment where the value is not money, for example, I'm thinking of an organization whose product is lobbying and it's made up of volunteers and nobody pays anybody, and success is that legislators vote the way they're desired to. How would you talk about the cost of delay if there's no money involved?
Yeah, that's a great question. It kind of gets at the heart of what this concept is about, and it's about making trade-offs. And so we chose money as the common currency in cost of delay in order to make our trade-offs between one revenue-generating idea and another revenue-protecting idea. If you have ideas you're trading off against, could we get more votes by pursuing this or pursuing that? You want to come up with some kind of common currency that allows you to compare those. In that case, maybe it's votes, maybe it's public opinion. You've got to figure out what is the core characterization of value, and then normalize to that so you can make your trade-offs against one apples to apples type comparison.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. This want more information is actually on the back of those graphical organizers, so no need to write it down yourselves. I just forgot to mention that at the end. Do we have any other questions around the room?
When you introduce this
There's a mic there.
when you introduce this into the company, was there a lot of, like eyes rolling and people saying like, what's going on here?
Good question, yeah. So there was a lot of pain at Vistaprint before we introduced this idea. When we began to take a look at ourselves and how we were doing, what we actually found was it took about 3 years from our ideas to get from conception out to in the market. And there's no way you could compete in today's market when it takes you 3 years to get an idea out the door fully baked. And so there was a lot of desire for change, and this is one of the pieces that we brought. And so when we started to look at the differences in value of the various things we had, people pretty quickly got okay with the idea of trying to use something. Now, that's not to say that there aren't challenges with it. There's a lot of difficulty in putting numbers on things that are intangible. That's an acquired skill. People don't do that the first day you ask them to. So you got to work at building those muscles. But I'll tell you, figuring out the difference in those items that are really worth $4.5 million versus those that are worth $4, that's worth doing. Got another question in the back?
Okay. Yeah, the first or second slide said quite a large percent of loss is in queues.
Yes.
Did Vistaprint, on realizing that, put a big focus then on cutting down the amount of queue delay? And if so, how successful was it?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're definitely one of those companies who has that type of problem. We've taken a value stream mapping tool to many different parts of our organization and looked at it. We find exactly those kinds of inefficiencies all over the place. I would say probably our biggest problem in that 3-year time frame was actually not controlling our organizational work in progress. So we had 100 different projects simultaneously running across 50 development teams, and every project was on the order of a year for delivery. And so people were constantly context switching, doing this, doing that, not available to their peers, working on the other 99 projects. So I think for us, a lot of waiting was created by the high whip. But there are many ways to create queues and cause things not to get done in an organization. And so the first thing we focused on, we actually started our Agile transformation from a lean perspective, was to reduce the lead time from that idea out to the customer. And the biggest piece of that was to start to cut into smaller increments and limit the work in progress.
Yay!
Yay! For all the lean folks in the room. Yes. That's good stuff. Any other questions? One in the front.
So apparently you gathered lots of data when using this in reality. So what about the actual cost of delay? How do they correspond to your guesstimates of the cost of delay? And if they weren't close, what did you actually learn from that, and was it still useful? Why?
Yes, excellent question. So as we were talking about sort of the difference in the estimates, the subject of uncertainty came up. And when you put out a cost delay, it's a starting point. And so what we try to do is encourage people to take off the first increments that reveal what that cost of delay really is in true value. At the end of our pipeline of implementation, we also have a phase we call discovery, where we're specifically pulling in the information from our learning and then feeding that back in. And if that readjusts the cost of delay we have as estimated on the remainder of the work we might do, that will then change the prioritization of that item, and we might choose, this is one we don't want to do. We've learned something, it's actually on the lower end, this is one we're going to set aside, or nope, this is more proof that our thoughts were good on the actual value. So it's an incremental learning, and then we feed that back in as a feedback loop. Does that answer your question? Kind of. You can try again after.
I have a question. You mentioned you had a lot of projects. So what did you do before to kick off the project? Is there some sort of internal rate of return that says, yeah, this is a project that's a go?
Yep. We had a big waterfall process, and it was once a year planning. So for about 6 to 8 weeks, people would get together and they would think about what things were worth. I would say no more analytical than what we just did in these 15 minutes. And they would bake it off, and by gut feel, people would say, yeah, I believe that person, I don't believe that person, this sounds good, that doesn't. They would pick a suite of projects, and then they would arrange all the Tetris pieces so that there were the right numbers of bodies according to the estimates of how much it would take, plan the year in advance, and set them off.
Do you do postmortems of how?
Do postmortems and forget all that information before the next round of planning came around, yes. We actually did some analysis on that. It was part of the reason we were so willing to change was the last year that we did it, we spent something like 54,000 hours trying to create and debate that plan. And before we even started the year, we threw out half of it. Didn't do a thing with it to create any value. One more.
What do your T-shirts mean?
Oh, great question. Very good. I should have mentioned this a little bit earlier. Joshua and Oslam were our teachers from a company called Verge, and they have a work-based curriculum that's teaching people about Agile and Lean. They call it value flow quality. So VFQ is the shorthand for that, and this was a little thing that we've started passing around for people who've actually gone through some of that education at Vistaprint. And we just thought it would be a good way for you to be able to recognize us while we were here. So this was the only uniform we had. But a good plug for Verge. It's a very nice umbrella that's kind of methodology agnostic. It's nice stuff. Other questions?
So what would your cost savings now with your new methodology?
Cost savings?
Yeah, how much should your company save by quantifying, by
doing cost
revisiting your project management?
So I would say we haven't looked at it from a perspective of cost savings. We've looked at it from a perspective of, are we chasing the most valuable stuff or not? And I will say that as soon as we graphed our data and we took a look at it with that, we were working on all the things in the tail and not in the head of that curve, our executives started saying, look, we've got to find ways to set these aside and focus our efforts over here. And so we've been changing the organizational focus to be more limited, to be concentrated on that left-hand side. It takes time, people are still incentivized by other things, but we're seeing an awful lot of good motion in that direction. So I would always encourage people to be value-focused rather than cost-focused when they're thinking about the things that they can create. Because if you focus on how many hours you're saving, you're kind of missing the point of the multiplier of what can happen with software. You can spend 100 hours and earn $100 million, right? If you've got the killer app, so you want to find those black swans and then focus your efforts there. Not exactly the straight answer to your question, but that's how we think about it. Anybody else? Yeah.
What if they don't steal your idea, but you know
or some kind of history that you come out with these new ideas and roughly 6 months after you come out with it, they're always in the market.
Say iPhone and Samsung?
Yeah.
Or,
You know, the idea comes out and they always catch up with you by some amount. Is that the third one, number 3?
I think that should play into your estimate of the long-running benefits of your idea. So you might have a limited duration idea, so curve number 2 for the first 6 months when they're not in the market, and then a curve number 1 in the long term once they've taken their share of it. If that's a pattern, you can combine those and take a look and put those together. Yes? Just grab your mic there.
So we usually use this for Scrum teams, or it's more for like management level where you have different epics and they're more top-down, okay, this is my idea, you figure out what you have to do.
Yeah, I will say that we've found it to be more valuable probably from the epic level on up. So we use it in the middle of our enterprise Kanban board, so as we're tracking our big ideas, how we're breaking them down, this is where we're primarily focused with it. But it's really helpful if the people who are working the Scrum teams can understand the cost of delay that's related to the work that they're pursuing. Because then that leads to those conversations where somebody's blocked and they can't get someone's time because they're busy in meetings all day, every day, and you say, look, I'm working on something with a $100,000 cost of delay and you are delaying me by a whole week. Is it really worth it for you to not answer my email? Like, I need your time. And it's a great way to motivate people, not by some fake urgency of some self-imposed deadline, but by the true urgency of the value of the things that you're pursuing. Great question.
Okay, I think we need to wrap up.
Okay, Tom, thanks. Thank you, everybody. I really love the interest.